In this example, I want to go ahead and take a look at the concept of JavaScript variables. So I'm going to go ahead and start by creating a new folder on my desktop, and I'm going to call that folder JavaScript variables. So I'm just going to rename the folder JS variables. And inside that folder, I'm going to create an HTML file and a JavaScript file. So I'm going to open that folder in Visual Studio Code. And then inside of here, I'm going to create a new file. So index.html. And then I'll also create another new file, which will be variables.js. Okay, so in my HTML file, I'll start with just a simple HTML5 template with the title of JavaScript variables. And I'm going to link to that external JavaScript file. So you can see that Copilot figured out that I want to reference my variables.js file. Okay, and what I want to do is I just want to work in that JavaScript file. I don't necessarily want to do anything with my HTML or anything like that. The HTML is more just a avenue to get to my JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to the JavaScript. I'm going to set up a window.onLoad event equal to this function that is going to allow me to then start dealing with some JavaScript. So in your first semester JavaScript class, you learned about variables and how important naming conventions are. So for instance, you might have a variable to store a first name. So you'll have a var first name equal to Brian. Okay. You might have created a variable that looked like that. You might have another variable, student age equal to 25 or 35 in this case. So you use that var keyword. I think some of you also have started to move over to the convention of using let. And let is going to be a direct replacement of that var keyword. For most of you, switching from var to let should not be a difference at all. It should just be a strict or a one-for-one change, moving from the keyword var to the keyword let. And all of you should be doing that. You should not be using the var keyword. You should always use the let keyword. Okay, so at this point, we have a variable storing the first name. We have a variable storing the age. We might have another variable, is student equal to true? And the reason I'm choosing these particular attributes is it's illustrative of the different types of variables that you might have in JavaScript. So for instance, first name is going to be a text-based variable. It's going to store text. And in actuality, what's happening is JavaScript is inferring that the value on the right-hand side of the equal sign is text. So it's saying that this is going to be a string variable. Okay, likewise, student age, the value on the right-hand side is a number. So JavaScript is interpreting that and inferring the fact that student age should be a number variable. And then lastly, the value on the right-hand side of line 4 is a Boolean value, either a true or false value. In this case, it's true. So the variable is student. In that case, is now a Boolean variable data type. Okay, and we can see that. And the way we're going to look at that is if I do a console.log, so I'm using the console, I want to know what the type of first name is. Okay, so I want to know what type of variable that is. And then I want to do the same thing for student age, and I want to do the same thing for is student. Okay, so I save all of those, and then I'm going to launch those with my live server. Okay, so down in the bottom, I have this option. It's kind of a quick launch to launch the live server. So I'm going to launch this folder in the live server. Okay, and you'll notice that there's nothing in my HTML window, and that's fine. This is a JavaScript class, so I want you to get used to the fact that I'm not necessarily using the HTML, but I'm using JavaScript. So I don't necessarily have to have anything to look at. What I have to do is I'm just going to right-click and go to Inspect so I can look at the JavaScript development tools. And then if I'm going to look at the console, you'll notice what's happening is that the first variable that I logged was a string, the second variable that I logged was a number, and the third variable data type that I logged was a Boolean. Okay, and if I jump back over to Visual Studio Code, you see that. It's a string, a number, and a Boolean. Okay, I can get more complex with data types. So for instance, I might want to know what the student courses are. So I might say, here's a variable called student courses, and I can say that it's an array. Okay, and I could put some values in there like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then I might want to know what the type of that student courses variable is. Okay, so now if I come back over, you'll notice that the type of student courses, it is an array, but JavaScript doesn't have a specific data type for an array, it just treats it as an object. Okay. Another way that I could have a complex data type is, let's say I had, uh, for instance, um, a car, and that car has attributes like the make and the model and the mileage and the year and the color. Okay, and let's say that's enough, right? So that car has different attributes, make, model, year, color. Okay, that's the different attributes of a car. And then I have corresponding values, a Toyota Camry 2019, and it's white. Okay, so if I go ahead and save this and I look at the type of object that is, I want to know what type of object that car is, you'll notice that it also is an object. Okay, so JavaScript, regardless of whether you have a collection like this array of student courses, or if you have object that has key value attributes or key value pairs, it's going to also treat that as an object as well. Okay, so those are the various data types that you might have. A couple of things that I'm going to point out with this is I'm using the let keyword to declare a variable. If I don't use the let keyword, if I just say I'm going to create a variable, for instance, first day of school equal to August 19th. Okay, so it's textual, right? It's a text because it's inside of quotes. And if I do a console.log, the type of first day of school, you're going to see that it's a string. And you'll notice that I didn't use the let keyword there with first day of school. JavaScript handled it just fine. You know, I notice I don't have any errors or any issues or anything like that. There's no errors showing up in the console. There's no issue showing up in the console. So JavaScript doesn't strictly require me to use the var keyword or the let keyword. What happens here is JavaScript creates a variable for me. So regardless of whether I use the var keyword or the let keyword, or none at all, JavaScript just handled it. However, it does have an unintended consequence that it does give it greater scope than it should. Okay. The reality is these variables right now, where I've declared them with the let keyword, have scope that's defined inside of this function. So these variables, first name, student age, is student, student courses, and car, all exist within this function that I've defined right here. So the scope is where I've highlighted the code, whereas first day of school has a larger scope, and we call it a global variable. Okay, so JavaScript says, oh, you didn't declare this variable, let me declare it for you, but JavaScript actually does it wrong. And when I say it does it wrong, it does it in a manner that we wouldn't prefer, which is it creates a global variable for us. If we really intend to have a global variable, what I would suggest is that we should declare it as a global variable as opposed to just letting JavaScript create that global variable for us. Okay, so we have that unintended consequence because we didn't explicitly define this as a variable. We let JavaScript define that variable for us. Okay, it still works, but not necessarily correctly. Okay, so we'd much prefer that let keyword in front of there. Okay, the next topic I want to talk about, so I always lump variables and constants together. I treat them as the same. The difference being a constant can't change after the fact. So the value on the right-hand side of a constant cannot change. Okay. I would suggest that constants are preferable. Okay, so with all of these variables, so every variable that I have here, I would argue that we assign a value, and then that value never changes throughout this application. Okay, so in that case, these all should be declared as const. The value is not changing in the application, so I'm going to declare them all as const. Okay, you'll notice that everything is working the exact same way. Okay, the one gotcha with constants is, let's say the student age right now is 35, and then later I decide the student age should get updated to 36. So maybe they have a birthday or something like that. So student age should change. Now you'll notice that I do have an issue, the assignment to a constant variable on line 14. So line 14 is an issue. I can't change the value of that constant student age. Well, I'd argue at this point, now it makes sense to change this to a variable. Okay, because the value is changing. And you'll notice everything else works just fine. Okay, so what is difficult is most developers get in the habit of, I'm going to create variables because those values might change over time. And what I'm going to suggest is that's not the mindset that you should have. The mindset should be that I'm only going to make variables if I have to, if the variable actually does change. If the variable doesn't change, I'm going to leave it as a constant. Okay, it's just easier for debugging and later development. Okay, I can always go back and change it to a variable, but by default, I'm going to default to constants. The other thing that you should notice here is the naming conventions. So in JavaScript, regardless of whether we have a variable that's defined with a let or we have a constant that's defined with a const, regardless of the situation, we always use camel case for our variable names. Okay, so I've seen some people that want to use this uppercase underscore type of convention for their constants. In JavaScript, that is not the convention. The convention is always to use camel case, regardless of whether we have a constant or a variable. Doesn't matter. The convention is always the same. We're going to use camel case for our naming conventions. Okay, so that's kind of a brief overview of variables in JavaScript.